So hello, today I'm at St Andrew and All Saints Church in Willingale in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village itself. So Willingale is a village in Essex. It's 5 miles from Chipping Ongar and 8.5 miles from Chelmsford. The village is surrounded by Essex farmland and it's fairly an isolated village. The elevation here is 83 metres or 272 feet in old money. Population today is around 498. Now, Willingale's history goes back to the Bronze Age, when an Iron Age axe was found here. Roman coins and a burial urn were also discovered, so a small settlement may have been here. Now we're right into winter now. It's -2 and it's a beautiful day today. There's frost on the ground. Now, during the Saxon period, Willingale was made up of 4 manors. Unusually 6 freemen held 2 manors, and Eldeva the Fair and Seaward the Barn held the remaining 2. Now, Editha the Fair was also known as Edith Swanneck, and she was renowned for her great beauty and paleness of skin. Edith was one of the wealthiest Saxons in England, owning an impressive 127 manors. Edith the Fair would marry Harold Godwinson, soon to become King Harold, the last crowned Saxon king of England. Now their daughter Gunhild would marry the Grand Duke of Kiev in today's Ukraine, but then in Rus, ancient Russia. According to folklore, and there are lots connected to Edith, it would be Edith who identified King Harold's body on the battlefield at Hastings in 1066. From marks, it's said, only known to her. It is also believed that Edith the Fair built the holy shrine called Our Lady of Walsingham in 1061. This became a famous pilgrimage and still is to this day. Now, Edith's Manor today is called Spain's Hall, which the land we're standing on now In 1086, with Norman rule, this manor passed on to Hervé de España, now Hervé of Spain, and still it bears his name. 936 years later. 936 years. Now, above Harvey was Count Elaine of Brittany, who was the tenant-in-chief. Count Elaine was a veteran of the Battle of Hastings, and it was his men that drew King Harold's Saxons to break rank in 1066 and leave the high ground that day. Spain's manor was wealthy, having 4 slaves, 4 villagers and 8 smallholders, and there were plough teams on this very lands, 250 pigs. And you can see today it's still farmland. Now it's interesting because a public footpath passes through here, and it leads you to the Willingale World War II airfield, also known as RAF Chipinonga. There's nothing much left now apart from some concrete, and we'll have a look at it later. Now, a short distance from Spain's Hall is Walden Hall, but once a Saxon manor, part of Willingale Doe. Now, in 1086, the manor went under Norman rule, with Ravenot its first lord. Now, above Ravenot was Ralph de Peveril, its tenant-in-chief, and Ranulph owned 64 manors. Ranulph is believed to have been William the Conqueror's son. Now, the manor itself may have been Willingale's capital manor. Walden's manor had 3 villagers, 1 freeman, 6 smallholders and 4 slaves. It also had 4 plough teams on this very land we're looking at now, 16 cattle, 65 pigs and 100 sheep, and also 5 beehives. Now, owning beehives during this time was a sign of great wealth, and Essex had 601 beehives, 30% of all of England's hives at that time. And they were called Vasa Upum, which was a coiled straw hive used by the Saxons and adopted by the Normans. Now, each hive had a guardian of the bees who would check around Willingale for wild nests in the woods and forests here. Now, we also know that each hive could yield about 5.5 kilos of honey, and there were 5 hives here, so it was big money. Now, Walden's manor got its name from William de Wanton of 1347. By 1393, the manor would be called Willingale Doe, and so Willingale would carry this name for 629 years. Now, Walden's manor would pass from family to family, the Torrells, the Wisemans, the Beadles, the Fitches, and right up until Sir John Salter, Lord Mayor and Sheriff of London in 1740. Now, Sir John made many changes here in Willingale, for he would improve the roads and rebuilt the 2 churches here. Yes, I did say 2 churches. And he would also convert the old manor into Walden's Hall of today. Now the other two manors had just as interesting owners and lords. For one was owned by Adam, son of Durand. Now the Durands would go on crusade in 1095, and also Swine of Essex, who was one of the wealthiest landowners in Essex. He would build a castle in Rayleigh and would serve both King Harold and William the Conqueror. So we can be sure that this quiet and isolated village in Essex once lived some of the noble families of England and France. Described as a village with two churches in one cemetery. Look at that, isn't that incredible? Now it is thought that in the 14th century the population here outgrew Willingale's church, which we're looking at now. So the de Espana family retained St Andrews, which we're looking at now, and the de All family built St Christopher's, which we're looking at now. Now local legend says that two sisters argued over the same seat in this very church, St Andrews. And whatever the truth, it's a very unusual arrangement. Now we should look at some of the old pubs which are no longer in use. Morning. This old pub was once called the Bell Inn. It's now a private dwelling. An inn from the 16th century, much altered in the 17th century. Now in 1845, William Tanner was the landlord here and ran the local post office from here, along with his wife Matilda and all their children. And they would live here until 1881. Now this old inn closed in 1988. Now we're looking at the Green Man, now private dwellings, built in 1650. In 1650, Oliver Cromwell is Lord Protector of the Commonwealth, meaning England has no king or queen. Now also in this year, Anne Green, a domestic servant, is hung for concealing a stillbirth. The physicians open Anne's coffin the following day and discover she has a pulse. They pour hot cordial down her throat and bloodletting. Unbelievably, Anne survives and is pardoned, believing it's the hand of God that saved her. Now Anne took her own coffin and remarried and had 3 children and lived a further 9 years. What an incredible life she had. Now later the Green Man Inn would become the village store and then a working men's club. We're now looking at the old school, built in 1732 by Robert Cole, who bequeathed £4 a year for the education of poor children. It was opened in 1863 and closed in 1985. It's now a private house. Now we're facing the last of the old pubs. This was the Maltster's Arms, owned by the Baddow Brewing Company of Chelmsford. Now this was a popular venue for the US Airmen of the 387th Bombardment Group, but also the 831st Engineering Group, who built nearby Willingale Airfield. Now, a maltster was a skilled worker who treated barley with malt in a brew house and brewed beer. And it got me firstly just saying that. I read that today in England there are only a handful of people who still extract malt from barley using the flour or the floor method. Now, here we have a medieval moat, parts of Torrell's Manor, which is a defensive structure, possibly Norman, and you would have to have crossed 8 metres of water to attack the square island, which I believe still exists. The Torrell family moved here in the 14th century. They moved from Shallow Bowels to Willingale, sorry. This manor was called Shallow Torrell. Now, a short walk through here leads us to this public footpath. Now, I believe this footpath was used by the US Airmen to get to the village from Willingale, or the airfield. Now, just a short drive from Willingale's village, we have the memorial. We're standing at the entrance of Willingale Airfield, also known as RAF Chipping-Ongar. It was built in 1942 by the US Army 831st Engineer Battalion. This unit built 3 concrete runways and a perimeter road in only 89 days. So it's a real credit to their skill and determination. Now, from June 1943, the US 387th Bombardment Group medium bombers would arrive here from Tampa Bay, Florida, USA. Now today you can take a public footpath from Willingale village itself, or I guess from here. What's left of the actual air or the runway, etc. is very little, but you can walk through lovely countryside, and there are a few hangars you can see from the edge of it. So let's go and have a look at the church itself. So we pass under this lovely old yew tree. Now we're looking at the south side of the church. So, St Andrew's and All Saints Church. The walls are of flint rubble and from these very fields, and we've got freestone and pudding stone, which would have been from the last ice age. We've got Roman brick and clunch, which make up the dressings. So now we are looking at the south porch itself, and this was built in the 19th century. So we've got a bird screen. So we're now looking at the south doorway. We've got square jambs, and we've got semicircular arch built from Roman brick. Now these bricks are from around the 3rd century, so they would be 1,700 years old. And if you look on the right hand side, you can see a big cluster of, looks like roof tiles from that period. Now what makes this church different is that it's looked after by the church's conservation trust. So it is no longer used for regular worship, but it's open to all. Okay, and it's about time I went in, so I'm going to take my hat off today. No caps, it's a little bit fresh. So if we pan around, we can see what the view will look like from the south door. Now we are standing in the nave, which measures 40 feet by 19 feet, and it's early 12th century. Now we're going to start on this board over here on the south wall. Now we're looking at the vicars and rectors of Willingale, Spain. Its first registered vicar was of 1329. And it was Hugo de Brestone Richard Higaon, if I got that pronounced wrong, all right. You can see that in 1928, Willingale, Spain was merged with Willingale, Doe and Shallow. Now you can see that we're coming up for Christmas, and they've got some decorations out. I believe it will be Christingle soon for the children, so they've made it friendly for the kids. And if you look, there's a visitor's book which you can fill in. And it's always good to fill in a visitor's book. It shows where you're from, and it shows that somebody's been in here, basically. Now we pan around, And you'll see a table here. And this goes into detail about the 387th US Bombardment Group that were here during World War II. There's some photographs. See the US Airmen having a dance. Also had a band of their own by the looks of it. Young lads in front of the B-26 bomber. Actually airborne. And there's a detailed plan of just how big this airfield was. You can see all the plots of land there. Goes into detail about what's on the plan itself. Now if we make our way up the step, in the corner there's a model of the B-26 bomber. On the wall we've got a picture . Now this is a dedication of the 4 bomber squadrons. Now notice the different colours and insignia of each squadron. Now as I understand it, each of these insignias would be painted on the plane, and also the propellers would have a different colour, or the cones of the propellers. Now if we pan around, we're going to look at the bell turret. And we're going to look at these oak structures here. Now we're looking at 2 pairs of oak carved braces and beams, a tie beam, 15th century. And if we go around the other side, we'll get a better look. We can see the original 12th century windows. If we look on this side, on the north side, we can see it's still got the shape in the timber itself. So if we look in the distance, we can just make out behind the pole, behind the font. So this is the Roll of Honour from the First World War. Now, beneath the Roll of Honour, we've got some really good pamphlets. So the first pamphlet goes into detail about the airfield, and it's got a map. And the second one is a heritage trail which has been compiled, and if you open it up, it gives a very detailed map and explains a lot of the buildings I've talked about. And then it goes into depth about each building. Now, just in front of the pamphlets, we've got this table here. And this describes the church itself, and it's also an interesting letter from the General Meeting of the Essex Archaeological Society in 1898. Okay, if we pan around, we've got a really, really rare north door. Now, although we're looking at a modern door itself, the actual ironwork is Norman, with possible Viking connection. It's dated between 1066 and 1127. Now we're looking at one of the sea hinges. Notice the serpent chasing its tail. And this could well be from the Norse mythology Jormungandr, the world serpent. Odin is said to have cast Jormungandr into the great middle ocean, where it grew so large, surrounding the earth, and grasping its own tail. Now in front of the north door we've got a 14th century octagonal bold font. With roses and faces. 14th century. Now on the north side it's more detail. Again the roses, and just make out this face here. Now above the south door there's a coat of arms. I'm not 100% sure of the history of this, it might be George III. If we walk down a little bit towards the chancel, we have a memorial on the wall. This is for those who lost their life in the First World War. I'm just looking at all these snowmen that have been, looks like they're hand crocheted. Now we're looking at this memorial slab to John Markham, Esquire, from Pater Noster Row in London. Now Pater Noster Row was a street in the city of London, and it was a centre of publishing and bookselling, and it was part of St Paul's churchyard. Now this street was famous in the 12th century, where skilled craftsmen made paternoster beads for monks who would pray 30 Latin prayers, Our Father, 3 times a day. Now John Markham died in 1757. Now in this year of 1757, London publishes its first directory of Harris's list of Covent Garden ladies. It was sold for 2 shillings and 6pence. Now beneath this memorial we also have John's wife Elizabeth, who would depart this earth in 1761. Now in this year of 1761, when Elizabeth was still alive, an earthquake struck London in Limehouse and Poplar, toppling chimney pots. We shall pan around and have a look at this pulpit. Now, this pulpit was donated in 1901 by Mrs. Brockett. It was moved in 1911 when the old box pew was removed. Now we're facing the chancel itself. Now the chancel measures 24 by 15 feet and it's rebuilt in the 15th century, most likely replacing an earlier one. Now we pan up to the chancel arch. Now this is a 15th century arch, 2 centred and 2 chamfered orders, and the capitals are grooved and the bosses cut back for the former rood screen. Now if we pan up we can see where the rood screen would have gone. Remember this is 15th century. Right there. Now if we go past the altar rails, which are either side here, and we look at the altar itself, the stonework is actually made of oolite, which is grooved and chamfered edge, and 3 cut consecration crosses. Let's have a closer look at it. Now, when I looked up oolite, the name derives from the ancient Greek meaning eggstone, and it was formed when warm, shallow water 165 million years ago, where England stands today. Today's Red Sea and the Caribbean are shallow tropical seas of today. So that's what England would have been like. Now, if we pan across, we have the piscina, and this is 15th century. Now next to the piscina is the sedilia, which is like a seat, and there's some really interesting graffiti. So here we have a series of crossbows, and the Archbishop here, graffiti of, this is 15th century. And you can see more crossbows there. If we go down further, now if we go up higher, we've got some interesting graffiti from the US Airmen. So this is from 1944, it's the USAAFF, United States Army Air Forces. And beneath that we got 1958, the RHSC, which I was not able to find out what it was. So remember that this was actually the parish church for the US forces at that time. So looking at the Reredos, which is in front of us, 1891, it's a memorial to Reverend Parker, who was rector here for 37 years, and it was painted in 1893. Now the horizontal beam, which runs across there, is believed to be a 15th century relic. Now, I couldn't tell you anything about these panels here. So now we shall make our way outside the church. So what I can tell you is the bells, there are two, and the second one is by John Langthorne, the late 14th century. John was a very early London bell founder, and he cast around bells around 1380, so it's most likely this bell was around that time, and that would be the time of the Peasants' Revolt. We can see a large amount of Roman brick. So I'm guessing there must have been a villa here, thereabouts. This is the chancel, the old door, south door for the priests most likely. It's a beautiful time of year. You can see the bell in there. Now I haven't been able to include the second church because I've got no information. Well, I've got information, but I couldn't gain access to it. So I might have to return on that one separately. I believe it was built in the 14th century. So you can see where they put a fire in here. A chimney. They've got a little access door. There's one of the old lancet windows. So I just wanted to show you one of these ancient footpaths. So this is most likely the original walking route, or one of them. You can see it's on the Essex Way. Got a very interesting weight here. And this will come in between the two churches. And you can see at one time they had 3 pubs here, now sadly they've got no pubs. I think the nearest pub to here is the Black Bull. So now we're going to approach from the last access. So St Andrew's Church is today cared for by the Church's Conservation Trust, and it's a trust which was created in 1969. It's a charitable trust which cares for more than 300 churches in England. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.